And welcome to another edition of the Comic Book Review Show. I'm your host, Matthew Soul, and today I'm going to be reviewing some of the latest releases in comics. And speaking of latest releases, if you would like to purchase any of the comics mentioned, or you just like to purchase comics in general, you can visit our sponsor Impact Comics at www.impactcomics.com.au, where the guys will offer Australia-wide delivery on all of their products. Okay, so first up today we have Black Magick Issue 1, written by Greg Rucka with art by Nicola Scott. Man, have I ever anticipated a book like this one. Earlier in the year, I was lucky enough to speak with the creators behind Black Magick, Greg Rucka and Nicola Scott. Both promised me that this book would be worth the reader's time, and they were right. First off the bat, I noticed the near black and white colour scheme with a few colour assets here and there provided by Chiara Arena. Now, an avid reader will return to this issue multiple times to try and decipher the meaning of these rare few coloured items. Now, this of course leads me to Greg Rucka's writing. The book feels like an episode of True Detective Season 1. There's enough mystery here to intrigue me to finish the story. Most issue 1s, especially from the big two, will set up a character and that's it. Rucka still manages to do the setup, but it is so integrated into the storyline that it won't take you out of the story. The overall issue is filled with unique moments that will drive you to pick up issue 2, just to get closer to the answers that you desperately need to know. Now, the artwork here is something to behold. It's no secret that Nicola Scott is a reigning talent in the comic book industry. In fact, a commissioned piece of hers still sits on my wall. But this is on a new level for the Aussie artist. The detail on display is amazing. There is one particular splash page that I won't spoil, but is beyond anything that I have been reading in comics. And next on my list is The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl Issue 1, written by Ryan North with art by Erica Henderson. Ah, Squirrel Girl, how much I couldn't care less about you. But let's be fair here. Squirrel Girl does have a certain appeal about her. Some would call her the poor man's Deadpool, minus the blood. But I would offer a dissenting opinion that she is just a more toned-down Deadpool, with just as much fourth-wall-breaking action. Now, in her new first issue, Squirrel Girl contends with moving to a new home, introducing her friends to her mum, and fighting/repairing a brain in a jar on a robot body villain. It's wacky, it's zany, and it's fun. But it's just not for me, just like Deadpool isn't for me. The book is just too wordy. There is so much dialogue, even in the margins. Now, reading this book does feel at times like walking in the mud, but the dialogue is where the humour is, and that is this book's strength. Even a cynical old comic book buff like myself got a few yucks here and there. Now, the art style is very cartoony, and I think that's exactly what this book needs, with lots of over-the-top action sequences, very expressive characters. I believe if you were a fan of the previous books, then you can be rest assured that nothing has changed for Squirrel Girl in this new series. And now it's time to tackle some books from DC Comics. And first up we have The Flash issue 45, written by Robert Venditti and Van Jensen, art by Brett Booth, Vicente Chifanes, I think, and Al Garsner. I hate the Flash's new costume. It really bugs the hell out of me. Now, the best thing I can say about this book is that it's at least a decent jumping on point for new readers. If you've been watching the Flash TV show and want to get in on the comics, here's your chance. Otherwise, this book is a bit of a mess. Now, when I was reading it, I thought, why do some panels look great and other panels look really subpar? I didn't understand. Then I checked the credits, was not surprised by 3 names listed for the artwork. Boy, does it stand out. One panel looks great, the next panel, the anatomy is so screwed up that you're going to wonder if the person drawing knows what a human looks like. Then in one panel, Zoom had a female face. And I actually thought this was a new take on the character until I saw the next panel. And on some pages the art looks great, then the quality drops, making the book overall pretty inconsistent. Now, I thought the writing was a bit superficial and was typical of a B-grade superhero tale. The captain is so on the nose that I thought he was going to say, "I'm too old for this crap." So, yeah, jump on this book if you want to know more about the Flash. Longtime fans of the character will have already given up by this point. Okay, now on to a better book by DC Comics, which is Cyborg Issue 2, written by David F. Walker with art by Ivan Reis. Now, the techno art, for lack of a better term, is really startling in this book. The way Cyborg's body changes and the way nanomachines move around to reconfigure is truly something to admire. Now, Reis's artwork here is pretty exceptional. In fact, the entire book is drawn so well that I'm definitely on board for issue 3. Now, I think this is the writing that Cyborg has deserved for some time. He monologues about the questions asked by the general public, how they relate to the nature of his disappearing humanity. But there's still the angsty stuff with his dad, and this I could probably live without. It feels to me like their disagreement has been going on forever, and it's getting a little long in the tooth. Now, the book touches on people with missing limbs receiving cybernetic replacements, which Congress is trying to ban, or at the very least regulate. Now, I think these ideas will evolve into questions about how human we are if we replace every part of ourselves. There's also an interesting opening panel in this book which predicts dark days ahead, and man, I love a good plot tease. Now, moving on to something fairly different here, is The Shield Issue 1, written by Adam Christopher and Chuck Wendig, art by Drew Johnson. Now, this is what I really dig about reviewing. Sometimes I come across a book I never would have thought to look at. The Shield is a cross between Captain America and the Crow. Instead of rising from the grave to avenge her love, the Shield returns to protect her country when she is needed. In this case, is it to protect America from itself? Now, that question is left in the air, while Issue 1 deals mostly with introducing us to the Shield, a potential ally, an opposing force hell-bent on her capture. Now, I think you can tell a complete story while introducing a character. This book, sadly, is all introduction to her powers and maybe her motives. Otherwise, Issue 2 is probably where the story will start. Now, the art is decent, in fact above decent in some panels, though it does get crazy close to floppy arm syndrome, but only once or twice. Otherwise, the book is drawn very competently. Now, if you're out for a new superhero with a bit more of a mature reader spin, then I would give this title a look. Okay, now on to issue 28 of Astro City, written by Kurt Busiek with art by Gary Chilona. Now, first, I like the overall theme of this book, about letting go of the past, forging forward with your own destiny. The book feels very wholesome, which, the older I get, seems to appeal to me more and more. Now, this issue of Astro City deals in part with the origins of Aussie Honor Guard member Wolf Spider, and later in the issue dealing with the heroes of his past and how they hold him back in some ways. Now, for the most part, this is written quite well, and the themes are presented very well. But I really can't stand Australian culture being portrayed in this way. The above-mentioned heroes of Wolf Spider's past are called Queenslaw. WTF. I get what Queensland is. I definitely know what coleslaw is. But why the hell would an Aussie superhero team combine the two and use it as a code name? And Banana Bender? Seriously? So, I get what it's trying to evoke, a classic Australiana, because we are dealing with Wolf Spider's childhood. But this idea of Australian classic culture is an invention of American storytellers. Nothing more, nothing less. And now that I have my gripe out of the way, onto the artwork. It has a real cartoony feel, which I think works with this particular story. I also really liked Captain Kookaburra's expressions, and some of the character designs were pretty intriguing. Now, the real plus here is that the art style matches the overall idea of the book, and you gotta respect that. Okay, time to have a look at Paper Girls Issue 1, written by Brian K. Vaughan with art by Cliff Chang. Now, can Brian K. Vaughan write a comic that isn't batshit insane? The answer is no. And would you really want it any other way? Although Paper Girls is a little less abstract than, say, Vaughan's Saga, the comic does open with a bizarre dream sequence that will definitely leave you scratching your head. Now, the book has this cool 80s feel to it, making it comparable to, say, The Goonies or E.T. in feel. Now, to its credit, the book about a group of young delivery girls shouldn't really appeal to me, but Vaughan's characters are all finding a unique voice in this book, which I found to be very engaging. Now, there's also a lot of world building in this issue, a lot of crazy to throw at some teenage girls, and maybe possibly some superpowers. Now, I also found the art quite unique as well. If Saga is anything to go by, Vaughan will have his artist drawing loads of weird and wonderful, which I think Chang pulls out quite easily in this issue. Now, his art style uses a lot of straight lines, and it's very clean cut. I'm sure anyone picking up this book will love the art and the storyteller. Now, this next book, Invincible 124, written by Robert Kirkman and art by Ryan Altley, is something I've actually been meaning to check out for quite some time. Now, in this issue, it looks like our main character Mark, aka Invincible, has a serious case of the Back to the Futures. Mark is trapped back in his past with all the knowledge of the future. I thought the writing tackled some pretty interesting issues. Mark is truly suffering in this book. He doesn't want to relive the past, the tragedies and the pain he's suffered, especially at the hands of his own father. Now, I thought this book is a pretty refreshing take on the whole time travel deal. It's also great for someone who has never picked up an Invincible comic. This issue gives you the broad strokes of the character and his teammates, which, as a first-time reader myself, I found invaluable. Now, I think long-term readers might be initially frustrated with this issue, having to retread old storylines. But, if they stick with it, I think they'll be intrigued with the idea of Invincible changing the future. The art here is pretty spiffy, as always for this comic. It's colourful and dynamic, though all of the characters are really tall and elongated. Now, don't get me wrong, everything is in proportion. I'm just not sure yet if I like this art style or not. Now, for the very last comic in this week's show, we have the compilation magazine Oi Oi Oi, issue 6, written by Various with art by Various. Now, it's refreshing to read a comic magazine again, especially one that's Australian produced. From the gorgeous cover to the stories within, I think everyone will find something that appeals, which is the real treat of a comic magazine. It's kind of like a present. Each page could yield a great surprise, which will push you further into the magazine. Now, there are a few stories here that appealed to me for a couple of reasons. 2 had sci-fi themes, which is always a draw for me. Eat to Live had a very interesting concept, following on the theme of a man's gotta eat, and how far will a person go to survive. Mars is a Kubrick-style tale, which has a surprise twist on the origin of humanity, definitely worthy of an episode of The Twilight Zone. Touched, and one of the reasons I changed my name in primary school, come from places of the heart, and it really resonated with me on a deeper level. So this is really a mixed bag of goodness, and so is the artwork, which is vastly different from one story to the next, but it fits with the narrative of each story that it belongs to. Now, my favourite art in this issue belonged to Eat to Live. It reminded me of RTA, which is Road Traffic Authority posters from the 90s, mixed with a classic sci-fi look that you really don't see much anymore. Now, I think for the price of this magazine, it's worth buying for the cover art alone. Consider the rest a sexy bonus. And that just about wraps it up for another issue of the Modern Meltdown's comic book review show. If you liked any of the books we mentioned on this week's episode, you can visit our sponsor www.impactcomics.com.au. Those guys can help you out with Australia-wide delivery. If you'd like more news on comics or pop culture in general, you can visit www.themodernmeltdown.com for our weekly podcast, which is also available on iTunes and SoundCloud. I've been your host, Matthew Soul. Thanks for joining me. Stay safe, and I'll see you next week.